Hello, yes, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is the fifth in an eight-part series where we are going over the Power BI and how are these most essential concepts on the platform and how we can use and leverage the different data sources, turn them into coherent, visually immersive, interactive insights. And today, in this fifth part of this series, we are continuing this journey and we will get into the agenda in a bit. My name is Hussam. I look at the reactor in the Middle East and Africa. I'm leading the program here. And as you know, the reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, connect, and work with the local peers and learn all about technology and what's happening in the space. And throughout those sessions and the series that we're running on a daily basis across the globe, this is a hub for you to learn and leverage and these resources and advance in your technology career. And if you are also early in career, also lots of programs that we're doing and series are designed to help you level up and advance. And in this series, we are again looking at the most essential concepts to help you use the data, turn them into interactive insights. And will be joined today by Ahmed. Ahmed, I'm adding you to the screen now.
Hi,
Thank you for
Hussam.
joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what are we expected to learn today?
All right, so welcome everyone once again. And today is going to be an exciting one for us in our journey to learn how to use Microsoft Power BI to carry out data visualization and analytics. So the topic is going to be on DAX today. And DAX is one of my favorite topics in Power BI as well. And for anyone who is going to be using Power BI, that's something that you can't really run away from because it's like what you use to program your reporting inside of Power BI. So we're going to be understanding the basics of DAX. You will learn about the most important things that you need to know about DAX and how DAX works generally.
Awesome, awesome. And as you know, everyone, we're all here to learn. So, a quick reminder about the code of conduct. This is a Microsoft event. We're all here coming to learn. So, let's be mindful of each other, friendly and patient, welcoming and respectful, open to all questions and viewpoints, understanding of each other's differences, and kind and considerate to others at all time. So during today's session, we highly encourage you to ask as many questions as you want in the chat. We'll have a regular check on the comments tab. This is where we will find all your comments and questions. And before we begin, maybe as a starting point, let us know where you are watching us from on this live session. And throughout the presentation, I will be sharing some learn resources, and interesting also GitHub repository where we gathered all the past sessions and the content and resources that you would need to apply the principles on your own. So leverage these links and ask as many questions as you want in the chat. I'm gonna step down now of the stage and leave it all to Ahmed. Ahmed, please start sharing your screen so that we can start today's presentation.
All right. So let me know if you can see my screen now.
Okay, I'm adding that to the stream. Yes, here we are. All right, I'll be in the background.
Okay. So welcome everyone once again. My name is Ahmed Oyelo, and I'm a Microsoft MVP and Microsoft Certified Trainer as well. And today we are going to be looking at an introduction to DAX. Now, there is actually no way you want to talk about Power BI as a BI and as an analytical tool without talking about DAX. Okay, so we're learning what DAX basically means and what you need to be able to learn and master DAX as you continue your journey in learning how to use Power BI. So I'll just go straight up into it right away. So, what exactly is DAX? DAX is an acronym and it stands for Data Analysis Expressions. So you are going to notice that the pace of my wording is going to reduce a little bit because DAX can sometimes be a complex subject and it requires every possible attention, and you also need to know about every possible detail about DAX as well. So whatever you're doing right now, make sure you have 100% concentration on this. And like I said, I'm also going to slow down in the pace of my wordings because I need you to grab every single thing I'm going to be throwing at you. So first thing is DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. That's not completely important. What is important is that we use DAX in Power BI for creating model calculations. So one other thing you can think about DAX is like a programming language that you have inside of Power BI. Okay, and I'm going to be showing you examples of why we say it is a programming language. But first, let's talk about what exactly do you use DAX to do inside of Power BI. So predominantly, we use DAX for four things in Power BI. The first one is we use it to create new columns, which we refer to as calculated columns. So if you think about your data set, say let's assume that you are connecting to a data set that is coming from an online website, for example, right? So let's say that you have like four columns on the original data set coming from online, but then those four columns will not be enough for you to create your visualizations because you actually need to derive some new columns. So take, for example, imagine if you have, let's say, names of countries in the original data sets, but you don't have the continents that the countries are from. Now, since the data set is coming from an online website, you don't have access to change the original data set. It basically means that you have to create a new column to enter the continents for each of those countries, right? That means you are going to need to write DAX to create new columns in your data model. Now, the second thing we also use DAX to do is we can also use DAX to construct tables, and that's what we refer to as calculated tables inside of Power BI. One table that you always create with DAX every now and then is one table that we refer to or that we call the calendar table, or many people also refer to it as the date table. So date tables are required in nearly every single Power BI data model because at the end of the day, your reporting will always bring up things that are about time series or things that we refer to as time intelligence. Now in DAX, there are certain things in DAX that allow you to easily create those time intelligence calculations, and those things rely on something that we call a calendar table or a date table, and you probably won't have that date table originally stored from your data source, so you're going to have to construct it yourself inside of Power BI. So that's the second thing we use DAX to do, to create new tables. Then another thing we also do with DAX is to create something that I refer to as data row security. Right now, since you understand what Power BI is meant for, you know that at the end of the day, you're going to have like a dashboard that you're going to share with several people. Now, at the point of sharing this dashboard with several people, there is a possibility that you want to hide some things from certain people, right? So take, for example, say you have four regional managers and you have to share the same dashboard with each one of them. But then every single manager should only see the data limited to their own regions alone. Okay. So to do that kind of thing or to implement something like that in Power BI, then you need to set up something called row level security, for short, RLS. Okay. Now, one way to think about it is just remember data row security. So you want to say that I don't want this manager to see all the rows in my data. I only want the manager to see the rows that belong to their own regions alone. Now, finally, the fourth thing that you use DAX to do in Power BI is to create something again that I refer to as visualization formulas. Now, visualization formulas, this is probably the first time you'll be hearing this term, visualization formulas. What it simply means is measures in Power BI. Because at the end of the day, the entire thing you do on Power BI is visualization. You eventually have to summarize your big data, you eventually have to summarize that complex data into meaningful visuals that communicate results to end users. Okay. Now, in that summarization and in putting those things into visuals, you have to kind of like, compress or aggregate your data in some ways that will make it easy for you to visualize only the summary. So there are formulas that you can create to do that in Power BI, and that's where measures come into place. Those are the four things that I use DAX to do in Power BI. We'll quickly go through them one by one. And the first thing I want to do is let me go over to my Power BI screen so that I can show you the data model that I'm going to be using for this demonstration. So if I go to my model view here in Power BI, you'll see that I have 5 tables. And from your modeling experience, you know that typically this looks like a star schema, which means that I have my dimension table here that contains details of my sales and all the orders. And I have, sorry, my fact table rather. Then I have my dimension tables surrounding it. So these are basically tables that store different entities of my business model, right? So for example, I've got my products here, I have my locations here, I have my customers information, and I have my sales team information here. Now, if you remember, I said DAX is a programming language in Power BI. So we can refer to it as a programming language in Power BI. So why is it a programming language in Power BI? Is basically because when you program something, what does it mean when you program something? It means that you're kind of like saying, do your thing, right? So you set something in place, like you leave an instruction and you tell Power BI, do your thing, right? That's what programming kind of like is. So first, let's start from the very first item that we have there when we said you use DAX to do a couple of things. So first, you can create calculated columns in DAX, which means you just want to add something to your data model. So if I go here to my data view, you'll see that on my orders table, I'll quickly summarize what this data set is about. So this is Superstore data sets. If you are familiar with it, and if you're not, I'll quickly summarize what it is. So it's basically data set for a store that sells different products. It's more or less like an e-commerce kind of business whereby customers come in to make orders on certain dates and they ship the orders to the customers using different shipment methods, right? So you have your standard class shipment, same day, second class, and first class as well. Then obviously it also contains the information about the customers in terms of their customer details, which you will find in the dimension table right here. You can see the names of the customers and their segments. Then also the data also includes the location of each order in terms of, so when you place an order, for example, you know that you have to select a location, you need to enter your shipment address and things like that. So where are these products that are being ordered, exactly where are we shipping them to? That's what you have on your locations table. Then we'll also have the product information that includes every detail about the product that is being purchased. And we have a sales team information that also records the source of every single sale in terms of maybe we have like affiliate links, for example, or we have a team of marketers in-house, for example. So that's a brief about the data sets. Now let's go into the orders table, for example. So on the orders table, you will see that we have quite a little bit of, we have some columns that represent transaction details in terms of the numbers. We have sales, we have quantity, and we have discount and profit. Now, if you take a look at the discount column, you are going to see that the discount column somehow looks like a percentage kind of column that indicates, the percentage of discount that was issued, meaning that this sale is probably not the final sale amount, right? It means that we still need to have something like a net sale amount. And to get that or to derive that net sale amount, we need to multiply the discount by the sales. Okay. Now, if this doesn't come from our original data source, then we can actually create a new column right here in Power BI that we're going to call net sales, and it will include that detail. So to do that, if you come to table tools inside of Power BI, you are going to see that we have a button here for new column. Now, you can also see the same button if you find yourself on column tools. And you know what the difference between these two are? If you haven't selected any column inside your data model, then you won't see column tools. All you see is table tools. So for example, if I go to locations table now, you see I don't see column tools. I can only see table tools, right? Until you select a column like this before you see column tools. Either case, you will always see a new column button for you to create your new column, right? So let's go back to the orders table, and I'm going to click on new column right now. So one thing you also have to note about DAX is either you are creating any of those four things that we mentioned earlier, which are calculated columns, calculated tables, row level security, or you are creating measures, you always have to give every single DAX formula you are writing must have a name. So first, I'm going to call this guy. So let's call this net sales. And since we know what we want to do with this, we just want to multiply the sales column by the discounts column. Now, you realize as well that Power BI happens to be like a visualization tool that allows you to model your data into different tables, which means that your data is always tabular. Now, since your data is always tabular, that means it is made up of rows and columns. Therefore, every single formula you want to write inside Power BI using DAX that requires that you use a column as an input in that formula, you must always specify the name of the table where that column is coming from. You get what I mean by that? So I can't just say, for example, that I want to multiply sales by profit. The sales must show that it's coming from the orders table. The profit must also show that it's coming, the discount must also show that it's coming from the orders table. So if you are referencing a column inside in DAX, you always want to reference the name of the table where that column is coming from. So if you think about it in another way, you realize that it's very possible that you have several tables in your model, and each of those tables, maybe you find one column that is common in many of the tables, right? So for example, you can always have dates. So you can have, like, let's say you have 5 different tables in your model, and out of the 5 tables you have in your model, 3 of them have a column called dates. So if you have sales table and you have maybe a targets table, on your sales table you can have a column for dates, on your target table you can have another column for dates. So when you're writing formulas in DAX, you must specify which column or which table is this column coming from exactly, right? So my net sales now, I could actually start by just typing sales, right? So I could start by typing sales like this. I'm going to see that DAX will give me options of the different things that have to do with sales. So for example, you can see others sales team ID, you can see others sales. So this in DAX is what we call IntelliSense. Okay. Now, one other way you can easily achieve this is, instead of starting with the name of the column, it's always a good idea to start with the name of the table, just to make sure that you are speaking the right thing. So I'm going to start with the name of the table first, which is orders. Then I can actually first of all select the orders as it is like this. Then if I put a square bracket, it's going to show me all the columns that I have on my orders table. And of course, I want to go with the sales column. Then you can either use your mouse to point to the order sales to select it, or you can just press tab on your keyboard for a faster selection. So I'm going to use the tab key to pick that. So I want my order sales multiplied by my quantity, by discount. So I'm going to start again. Orders, once again, multiply by orders, then my square brackets, and I'm going to pick discount. And when I hit enter, you see that I have my new column called net sales, right? And if you check, Do I have this correctly? I should have sales multiplied by discounts. Yeah. Okay. So wrong logic, isn't it? So it's not necessarily sales multiplied by discount. Is more or less like sales minus sales multiplied by discount. Because if I want net sales, I'm going to have to say first the orders sales minus this, right? So the first one I've written, this entire line basically represents the discount value. Okay, so this is going to be my net sales amount. So when you have a discount, for example, you should see that the net sales should be a little bit lesser than the net sales amount. So let's just pick one guy here. You see total sales 509, net sales 433. That's just basically a very simple calculated column that we have created in DAX, all right? So now let's go to the next thing. So what's the other thing you can do? So the next thing you can also do is to create calculated tables. And I told you that one of the tables that you always refer to, that you always create every now and then, is something that we refer to as a date table. So we are going to create a date table in DAX. How exactly do we go about that? Okay. Now, you need to have information about certain things that I'm going to discuss later. But first, let's just create a date table now. So if I go back to my data view, you actually don't have to be in data view. You can stay anywhere here. Just make sure that you go to your modeling tab. You are going to see where you can click on new table. But I'm going to stay on data view so that we can easily see the table I will be creating as quickly as possible. So if I go to my table tools right here, I can click on new table. And I'm going to say that I want to create a date table. Now, I don't like to call my date table. I prefer to call it calendar table. So I want to create a calendar table. What I need to construct a table now, I'm going to need to refer to one of the libraries, or let's call it function libraries inside of DAX. There's a function in DAX that allows us to generate a list of dates automatically based on the date we have in our current data model. And that function is called calendar auto. So if I use this calendar auto function now, and it has just one argument, we'll come to functions in a bit. I can just close the bracket because the argument that you have right there is optional when you are using functions in DAX, and your function argument is inside a square bracket. That means that function is basically optional. So I'll just close this bracket and hit enter. Then you see that I have a new table right here called calendar, and that table has one single column for dates. So we'll come back to this column much later. I mean, back to this table in a bit. So that's me basically having constructed one single calculated table inside DAX. Now let's go to the next one. So the next one is data row security. So data row security, like I explained earlier, is called row level security, and it's simply a way of controlling what the users of your dashboard are going to see based on the content of your data. So for example, if I go back here to Power BI, and let's say that I'm going to create one single visual, just a single card visual like this. And on this card visual, I want to put there the total sales. So I'll just go and drop sales column in there. So you see that my total sales is 2.3 million. Now, let's assume this is all I have on this dashboard, for example, which is never going to be the case, right? So I have 2.3 million in sales, and I want to share this dashboard with 4 different regional managers, okay? So I'll pull up my slicer briefly. So let's use this slicer now to show managers, or let's say to just pick region, right? So I want to put regions on this slicer. I have my regions on my locations table. I put region right there. So you see that I have 4 different regions. Now the idea is once I share this dashboard, what the manager in Central is going to see as total sales, for example, should be 501,000 instead of what? Instead of seeing 2.3 million. The manager in East will be looking at 678,000 and South will be looking at 391,000 and so on and so forth. But I'm going to share this dashboard only one time and then I'm not going to include the slicer there for them to pick. So automatically once it gets to them, automatically what this card will be displaying is going to be the amount of sales for their regions. That means I want to limit the rows that they have access to from the data set. And that's where row level security comes into place. Okay. Now, how do you create row level security? To do that, you have to be in the modeling tab as well. Now, what have you noticed about Dax so far? You probably have seen that nearly everything that has to do with Dax, you have to start from the modeling tab inside Power BI. Okay. So to create my row level security, I'll go over here to manage rows. And currently I have no rows. You see everywhere is completely blank. I need to create a couple of rows. And the rows I want to create now are 4 rows, isn't it? Because I have 4 different regions. And what I want to do is I want to create each of the regions that has only a filtered version of the table. Instead of having my regional table includes every single person, my locations table including every single region, I want to create like 4 different rows whereby in each location the dashboard is going to filter to show only one particular region, right? Those are going to be my rows. So if I click on create now, I have to give my role a name. Remember, once again, for every single thing you do that has to do with DAX, there should be a name for it. So my first role, I'm going to call, let's say, Central. Let's call this Central. You can use Central region. It doesn't matter. Just use anything you feel like using that is going to make sense, right? So Central region is the name of the role. Then I'm going to go to my locations table. You see this ellipsis dot dot dot. That's where you can click on for more options, and you will see an option that says add filter. And the filter I want to add now is on the region column. So I'm going to select the region column like this, and I want whoever I'm going to apply this rule for, the data must be limited to show only the regions that are called central. So I'll call this central like this. Then I can mark here to say that I'm done with this role. Then I can create another one. Let's call this north. No, I don't think I have anything north in the data. So let's call this east region. And I'll go over here to locations once again. For east region, come here to locations, my ellipsis, add a filter, let the region be equals to east. Then I can create another one for west region, and I want the location to be equal to west region, west. And then finally, the final one should be south. Then locations, filters. Now you can actually copy from one of the previous roles that you have created. So if you don't want to start, your role creation from scratch, right? So I can say copy filter from any of these regions above, and I'm just going to change this region here to south. It's pretty much the same thing. Now I'm done creating my 4 rows. I can click on save. And you probably won't notice any difference, and you are not supposed to notice any difference actually, because I've basically created some roles now that I can use once I have my report published and I'm ready to share my reports with this different manager. That's when the rules are going to apply. But this is originally what my visual says, 2.3 million. One thing you can do is you can actually test your rules, at least to be sure that you have written your formula correctly. So you need to test each of your rules to be sure they are working and to be sure that you'll be able to implement them when you publish online. So I'll go back right here to modeling tab, and I'm going to use the option to view. So view as, and let me test the central region, for example, and click OK. You see, it shows 501,000. Now, what that means is once this dashboard is shared and I've applied the role for central region to the user, to the manager that is coming from central, then this is the value they are going to be seeing on the dashboard. Now, you understand that this is going to apply to every single value you have inside your reports, right? So that's quickly how you create a very simple row level security. Now let's go to the next one, which is the crazy one, and that is number 4, visualization formulas called measures. Now, if you look at your charts in Power BI, you realize that you are always visualizing some kind of numbers, and those numbers are always summarized. So your summary of your numbers can come in different ways. It can come in form of totaling or sum total. It can come in form of averages. It can come in front of counts. It can come in form of minimum, maximum, and so on and so forth. Now, the fact that those numbers are numbers in the first place means that they are measurements, right? They are measurements of certain things. So if you are looking at sales, for example, it's a measure of how much sales you have made, how much money is a measure of how much dollars have been paid for the particular transaction. If you are looking at discount, it's a measure of how much percentage is applied to the particular transaction, and so on and so forth. And that's why every time you go to your data, if you go to my fields pane now and I expand my orders table, you will see that columns that have numbers or column that contains numbers in values will always have this summation sign right there. That's to tell you that this column is a measure column. Okay, it's a measure column basically. Now, so far, the fact that I'm seeing 2.3 million now without writing any single formula doesn't mean that a measure is not in place. And that's why you see that I have called these visualization formulas. Every time you are visualizing something that has to do with numbers, then measures have basically kicked in. However, there are two types of measures. There is implicit measure, which you have not defined yourself, and then there is explicit measure, which you will have to define yourself. So right now, we are enjoying the benefit of implicit measure because if I remove this for 1 second, and I bring it back, the moment I click on this sales column to tick this sales column right here, you see that it automatically gives me a summarized value of my sales as 2.3 million. And that's because, like I said earlier, sales, because it has numbers, that means it has measurements, that means it's a measure column by default. And the fact that it has summed the total sales for me now is because an explicit measure has kicked in to action. Now, how do you see what this explicit measure is? You don't get to see what the measure is in terms of the written form of the measure. The highest you can see is what type of measure is working. So for example, is it a sum? Is it an average? So if I come to my fields panel here, where I have my sales, I can do a right click on that sales, and I'm going to see that the sum measure is what is being ticked. Okay, I could change this to average, for example, right? I could do a right click again and change it to minimum, and so on and so forth. So let's just go back to sum. Now, every single thing you find here are ways that you can visualize your measure columns or your numeric columns inside Power BI by way of implicit measures. Now, you will see that there is a limit to the number of measure calculations that are available implicitly. And that's why you will have to create your own explicit measures. And that's why we have DAX, called data analysis expressions, because you can now express yourself based on the logic of whatever calculation you need to run for your visualization. So we are going to define this exact same implicit measure right now. We will define an explicit version of this measure. So let me make this one a little bit smaller, like that. Then I can go to my modeling once again and select new measure, or I could do a right click on any of the tables here, and I'm going to see option for new measures. Now the point is, whichever table I right click from is where the measure is going to drop. So if you remember, if you want to think about the differences between measures and calculated tables and calculated columns, you will see that when you create a calculated table, you have a new table in your model. When you create a calculated column, you have a new column in one of your tables. And when you create row level security, everything is kind of like hidden because you are going to apply that role when you publish your report. But you see, once you create measures, measures doesn't add to your data. It's just a calculation that you want to visualize. So for example, this implicit one now is a calculation of our total sales that we want to visualize. You see that it doesn't actually add something else to the data. It's just a calculation. So there is nowhere in my data that I'm going to find 2.3 million, right? It's a calculation. So, but that's the implicit one. To create that explicitly, I can right click on the orders table now. That means this calculation, I want to be able to see, I want to see the, let's call it now, the handle that is going to take the calculation. So when I want to visualize it, is that handle that I can take to my chart or to my visual. Okay, so I want that handle to remain in this table. So I'm going to use new measure from my orders table. And let's call this total sales. So this is going to be called total sales. And guess what I'm going to use? I'm going to use a function from our function library in Dax that is called sum. When you type the name of the function, you always have to open brackets, and you need to select which column exactly do I want to sum. I want to sum my sales column. And remember what I said about Dax, you need to kind of like specify the name of the table where your column is coming from. I need to specify that my column is coming from the orders table. And I will use my square bracket so I can see a list of all the columns on my orders table, and I'm going to pick the one that is sales. Close and enter. Now I have a measure, a visualization calculation. You don't get to see the results until you have visualized it. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. I'm going to create a new card visual, and I'll put in that total sales. And you see that we have exactly the same amount for the implicit version and the explicit version. And this calculation, once again, is summing the sales column. That calculation runs to sum the sales column. And this is going to take us to the next thing that we need to talk about. So now we know what DAX is. We know how to use it to create, each of these basic things. Then, what exactly should you know about DAX to master the language? What do you need to know? What do you need to learn? Okay, so the first thing you must understand about DAX is how it works. Okay, and how DAX works is based on something that we call evaluation context. And what evaluation context simply means is the particular calculation that you are running, in what environment is that calculation working from, right? And I will explain what the two environments are now, or the two types of environments that your calculation can run from. So there are basically two types of context, which we understand now to be environments in which your calculation is running from. There is the row context and there is filter context. A row context basically means that whatever formula you have written in DAX is going to be applied on each row of your data. Now you see I'm talking slowly again because right here we have come to the most important aspect of DAX. Okay, so row context basically means whatever formula you have written is going to be applied to every single row in your data. Now if you think about it, now I've written a couple of formulas now, right? I wrote one to create a table, I wrote another one to create a column, I wrote another one for a measure. Now, if you think about it, those three ones that I've created now, for example, can you think about in what context each one of them were running from? So, for example, when I did a calculation that computed our net sales, was that calculation applying for each row of my data, or was it applying to a group of my data sets? That's what we mean by evaluation context. Now, by simple explanation, when you write a formula in a calculated column, so for example, if I go back to this orders table and I go to the column I created a net sales column. Now, what was the formula for the net sales column? It was what? The order sales column minus the multiplication of the order sales by the discount. You will agree with me that this formula basically is going to apply to every single row on this data table. What does that mean? So on row one, I'm going to pick the sales amount on row one and multiply and minus from it the multiplication of my sales and my discount on the same row. That's how I'm able to get the value for that row. So I will have different values for each row because this formula is going to apply on a row by row basis on this data set. That's kind of like simple enough, right? It's very simple. Row level, right? Row context means that the formula you've written this formula just once. You don't have to write it for every single row. You have written once, but then it's going to be applied to every single row in your data. That's what row context means. Now, what does filter context mean? If I go back to my report, I have written one measure called total sales. And right now, you see the total sales gives me a total value of 2.3 million. Now I'm going to change this. So let me delete this and delete this. Now I'm going to use a table visual. Let me use this table visual. And then I'm going to drop the same formula right there, total sales. So tick total sales right there. And you see that I still have 2.3 million when you approximate, right? Just like 2.3 million as the value of my formula. So let's check the formula one more time. The formula says what? It says the sum of the order sales column. But right now, it's giving me 2.3 million because I am not visualizing the formula by anything within my data set. So for example, let's go and use the regions to see how much sales is coming from each region. So if I add region to my visual here, you see that now I don't have 2.3 million anymore, except at the last level of my data. Now what I have is different values for each of my regions. Meanwhile, I have written just one single formula in a measure, which is to sum the sales column. Now, the way this sum of sales column works now, because I'm inside a measure, is working based on the filter context, which means the formula sum of sales is only going to apply after a filter has been detected. Now, filters in your data or in your report or in your visuals can come from different places. The first place your filters come from is within the visual itself. So right now, because I'm visualizing the regions now, so every single region represents a filter. So the sum of sales technically now is going to run 5 times. Technically, it runs 5 times. The first time is going to filter all the central regions as a group. Then the sum of sales column is going to apply. And that's how we have our 501,000. This concept is extremely important for you to understand DAX because most of the things we'll be doing with DAX is going to be on measures. So you must understand completely how the filter context and the row context work. Okay, I've given you a very quick summary right now that row context works on your calculated columns, filter context work on your measures. Okay, now just mention it here now that you can also have row context showing in your measures, but let's leave that for now. What's important for me right now is for you to understand that every single number that you are seeing here on this visual, you need to understand how the number was computed, and the numbers was computed based on the filter context in place for that particular value. So for example, like I said once again, one single measure, sum of sales column, is going to run under different contexts. First, it has to spot a filter called central, and then it's going to group the data by the central regions, and then the sales column will now be summed up. That's when you have 501,000. The same thing is going to happen when it gets to east. It's going to group the data to show only the eastern regions, then it's going to sum the sales column to have what you get. That's important because if you think of the total as the summation of each of these values, then you are going to be wrong. Why? Because the total you see here now is definitely not the summation of the single values that you see there. Why is it not the summation of the single values? It is not the summation of the single values because DAX works based on filter context when you are using a measure. And what it means is that before the formula runs, it is going to, first of all, detect all the filters in place. After detecting all the filters in place, the formula is now going to be applied to the group of things inside that filter. Therefore, the total that you see here is not the sum of each one of these guys. More or less, it's actually the sum of the sales column when there is no filter. Because when the filter was central, the sum is 501,000. When the filter was east, the sum is 678. When the filter was south, the sum is 391. When the filter is west, the sum is 725. When the filter is none of these guys, the sum is 2.3 million. That's exactly how you need to think about tax. Otherwise, you will basically not improve on how to write DAX formulas, most especially the measures. Okay, I'll show you one more example to show you that this total is actually not the total of all of this. So if I go to my formats here, I can basically go to totals and you see that the total label can actually be changed. So I could change this and call this Ahmed. Okay, so if I call this Ahmed now, what does it mean for you? You see that it's just a placeholder that is called the total. That's actually working because there is no filter in place. So let's clean this and let it take the default name again. And you also see that by the time I remove regions from there, you see my value is going to return to show 2.2 million. And like I said, that's when there is no filter in place. So let's bring back region. And you see it's going to split it again by those filters. Now, it's also very important that we have to discuss the sources of filters that you can have in your report or in your visual. The very first one can come from your visual. So every single description that you have on your number is a filter. Every description that you can attach to each value that your measure is showing is one of your filters. So for example, I'm using an ordinary table now, and each number can be tied to one region or the other. That means the filtering is coming from the region column right now. Now, if I change this visual to a metrics visual, where I can control what is showing on the rows and what is showing across the columns. So let's say now that I go to my orders table and let's say that I put shift mode on columns, then you see the numbers even change further, because now this 58,000 is calculated based on which filter. The region is central and the shift mode is first class. So remember, once again, before your formula runs in a measure, it's going to first of all detect the filters. That's what you must always remember. You have to think like that. If you don't think like that, it's easy to start getting confused. So you must get into that thinking that even though you have written sum of sales column, this sum of sales column is never going to run until it detects the filters one by one. So technically now, the sum of sales column now technically is running how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 25 times, because it's going to detect 25 different filters. The first filter is central and first class. Second filter is central, same day, central, second class, central, standard class, and then central without filtering by ship mode. That's the 501,000 that you have there. Okay, so that's how it's going to run separately for each of the filters that we have. You have to be able to think that way to understand DAX. Okay, now let me say it one more time so that at least you will always remember it. And if possible, you can dream about it. Okay, before your measure is going to run, the filters will be detected first. Now you have seen two sources of filters. It can come from the rows of your visual if you are using a table. It can come from the columns of your visual if you are using a metrics table, for example. And if I change them now, so let me remove shift mode and use an ordinary chart. So let's say I use a bar chart like this. Then you know I don't have rows and columns now. What I have is axis. So you see that the filter now is coming from the axis of my chart. In short, your filter can come from inside your visual. Whatever you are using to describe the numbers in your visual is your first source of your filters that is going to affect how your calculation runs. Because why? Because your measure doesn't run until the filter is in place. Okay? I'll keep on repeating that. If that's the only thing I can say for 1 hour, I can say that repeatedly every millisecond for 1 hour, just for you to get that right. Okay. Now that's the first source of your filter from your visual. Another source of your filter can come from your filter pane, right? So if I change this back to table, just for us to see what's happening. And I put something on the filters pane, like maybe I go to products and I include product category in my filters pane here, and I pick maybe furniture, for example. You see the values have changed. That's because before my formula run, it's first going to determine all the filters in place, which in this case, there's filters coming from inside the visual, and there are other filters coming from outside the visual. That's why for every single visual you have, if you click on the filter icon on the visual, it's going to show you the filter that is coming from outside, right? So now I know that from external, I have filter coming from the category column, and it's filtered to furniture. So every single number now on this my visual, this my table visual, is filtered first of all into furniture before it's now filtered by what I have inside the visual. And that's all going to happen before the sum of sales is going to run. All right? That's source number 2. Source number 3 is going to be slicers, right? So I can have a slicer here now where I'm going to put shift mode, right? So if I pick a shift mode here now, that means before this formula is going to be evaluated, remember, once again, that's like an external filter now. So if I click on my filter icon now, I should see that, okay, I have a filter coming from the visual itself. I have two other filters coming from outside the visual, and all these filters are going to be applied before you see what your final measure value is going to be. Now, if I ask you to describe what this 156 value mean as far as filters context is concerned, the context is now different from the one I showed you earlier when there were no outside filters. At that point, I showed you that, the total value there is basically when there is no filter on the regions. Now, yes, there is no filter on the regions right now. I have 156. However, I have some external filters. I have a filter coming from the category as furniture. I have another one coming from ship mode as second class. So once again, this 156 value that you see here is not the sum of these guys one by one, because DAX in measures work based on filter context. This 156 rather is a function of there is no filter on the regions, but then there is a filter on category, which is furniture. There's another filter on ship mode, which is second class. By the time you add those two together, when the data is filtered to show furniture category and second class ship mode, and it is summed up, then you see you have a value of 156. All right. So that's your number two source. Number three source from the visual, from the filters pane, and also from your slicers. Then your filters can also come in from every other visual that you have. Because now if I create a new visual like a pie chart like that, and let's say I'm using on that pie chart maybe one sales team, I put in sales team and I'm checking out their sales. Now, based on this fact, now if I click on something on this visual, because there is natural interaction between this visual and the other visual, you see the values will also change as well. So that's like your another source, right, from the other visuals that you have. Okay, so let's go back and try to round this up now. So you must understand the context in which your DAX formula is running from. Row context, especially when you are in calculated columns, and filter context, especially when you are writing measures. And for you to actually be good with DAX, DAX has over 400 functions in its library that you have to know what each function does. So right now in this class, we have used two of those functions. We have used sum function to sum up a column. We have used calculate. We have used calendar auto as a function to generate a calendar table that has one single column with a list of dates. So for you to understand DAX, to know DAX very well, you will have to know about the different functions that we have in DAX, which are predominantly grouped as aggregate functions like sum, which is going to take a group of numbers, aggregate it and give you a single value. You also have a group of functions called iterators. So these iterator functions basically is first of all able to go into your data and do some calculations row by row. I'll show you that example shortly. Then you have table and filter functions that allow you to kind of like filter your table before you apply a formula into it. And that's going to be like your new source now of where your filters can come from, because you can use a DAX function library to also apply a filter before your calculation is going to run. Then there is also calculate. You see, I've intentionally brought out calculate as a function that you also need to learn, because it's more or less the most important DAX function that we have. It will run most of your DAX calculations. So the common DAX functions that you have to know, there is sum x, those aggregate functions, obviously. Then filter, so you need to read about this function. That is filter, there is all, there is values, there is distinct, and there is calculate, there is summarize, and there is add columns. So finally, I'm just going to write one more formula that is going to use an iterator for you to have, or that is going to use like a combination of iterator and any of these things that you see here to round this up. So let's see. Let's remove all of these guys and just remain with just one thing over there. So here, I'll remove this filter and we are left with this. Okay, so let's take out these total sales, and I want to use the new column I created, net sales column. So I can use the net sales column like that, and you see what our net sales amounted to. Obviously, I could do the same thing if I create a new column. So that's like an implicit value for the net sales now, right? So I can create a new measure like this, and I want the net sales explicit value. This is net sales. Let's call this explicit. It's a simple sum of my orders net sales column. It should
Ahmed,
give me,
allow me to quickly step in and remind you about the time. I know it's a big topic and we can spend hours talking about it. In the meantime, I would like to also remind everyone that we have received few questions in the chat. Some we have already covered throughout the session itself. And the session is recorded and will be available on YouTube straight after we end this broadcast. There is also a GitHub repository where it lists all the resources, data sets, etc., that you can use also to um, build and execute based on the different sessions that we are having. So that's pretty much it. I want you to send a few questions, and I will give back Ahmed some time also to finish the current part.
yeah, thanks. I'm just going to round up in 60 seconds. Okay. So now I have net sales implicit. I have another net sales explicit. Then I just want to use the iterator function to calculate the same thing, right? So if you think about the net sales, you see it's coming from a column here called net sales, which we're able to use the row context to generate, because when you use your formulas on the calculated column, it's going to apply on a row by row basis. Then now I want to write a measure now that is not going to depend on this column. Meanwhile, you know that to write our net sales, we need to trigger our row context somehow, because we need some calculations to run on a row by row basis to get net sales. So I'm going to use an iterator, because iterators allow you to run some calculations row by row first. So let's assume that I have not created that net sales column, so I can call it net sales with iterator. And instead of using sum, I'm going to use an iterator version of sum, which is sum x. Sum x will first ask me for a table that is going to iterate over. You have to iterate over the orders table, comma. And the expression is, I need to specify that same expression that we used to generate our net sales, which was sales column minus open brackets, the same sales column multiplied by discount. You see why you have to call the table first, multiplied by discount. So these are our net sales using an iterator function now, because iterators allow you to run some calculations on a row by row basis. So now you see that we have the same result for each of the three of them, right? So just as a way to round this up, you have the basics for how each of the evaluation contexts basically work, and then you just have to build your knowledge of DAX functions. So thank you. Let me see if we have some questions. So do you have questions? Let's see.
I'm adding David as well to the stream. Thank you for joining us, David.
Hi, thank you, Ahmed, for your session.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
there is a question.
Okay.
So the question was, is it because there is a discount in percentage? That is why you calculated for net sales.
That's correct. So the discount is a percentage column. So, and I'm trying to get what the net sales is by applying the discount to the sales amount.
Okay, great. So that is the only question that we have.
All
But it's a
right.
fantastic class because a whole lot of people love the class and they even want you to go over for some hours if it's
Obviously.
possible.
I think
I
that.
think we should schedule something later on as well as a follow on to today's topic.
Yeah,
The ideal is to have an hour session. This will keep the most engaged with us, and I'm happy to see also earlier in the chat that we had also not just from the Middle East and Africa, but also like beyond that. I've seen some in Singapore, some from the US, the
Turkey,
UK.
also Turkey, UK,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly, and of
Uganda.
course Nigeria and Uganda and like lots of places in Africa and the Middle East. That's great.
Somebody wants to ask question, but I'm still waiting. Agile coach Qatar said I have a question, but hopefully he types that before we are done with the session. But thank you, Ahmed, for this session. Thank you very much. And
Pleasure.
Latvia,
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
yeah.
While we have you, David, with us, maybe we can do a quick mention for what's happening next week. We're doing the reporting and analytics. So tell us more about what's happening in that part of the series.
Okay, so if you notice, for everybody who have been with us from the first session, we go topic by topic. Last week we talked about the data modeling, but today we are talking about DAX. But next week will be more of reporting. So the reporting and analytics side of Power BI is what we'll be dealing on. So we've done some DAX. So how do we visualize and create more analytics when it comes to Power BI? That will be the focus for next week.
Awesome, awesome. I think, well, the last question was if they can go on stage and mention the question. Unfortunately, with the current tool, we cannot. All questions need to be sent in the chat. So that will be the way to go. I put in the chat as well the link to the next session. So it's going to be on Wednesday as well, March 9th. Please make sure that you register for that session. And if you want to catch up on everything we have done till today, this will be found on YouTube. And also, David did a nice GitHub repo for you to find all these resources in one place. So I'm gonna also bring that in the chat as well. It's a link I shared earlier. You can use it to access the resources and the past videos. There you
Yeah.
go. Awesome. One more thing before we go, there is a Learn module that you can follow to continue the learning journey and go beyond what we have discussed. So every time we're doing a session, we are recommending based on the expert advice something that you can continue the journey with. So this is the link for you to continue the journey and explore the topic more. You'll find lots of interesting content on Microsoft Learn. It's a free resources where you can do it in your own time. This is a module called Use DAX in Power BI Desktop. It's consisting of 7 different modules which you can do on your own to maximize the learning and the benefit from the session.
Also, the agile coach, you can talk to Ahmed on LinkedIn or Twitter, and you ask him questions. I think that will be better.
Okay, is there another trace tool to help uncover how results were computed? That was the question.
Yeah. Yeah, so if that's the question, there are some external tools outside of Power BI that you can use for some extensive DAX things as well. So there is DAX Studio and there is also a Tabular Editor as well. So those tools can be leveraged to a whole lot of other things with DAX, including tracing, where your filters are coming from as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I think that's a wrap for today's session. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your experience with the community members. And looking forward to having you again in the future in like a following reactor sessions. Thank you, David, also for being part of today's session and also taking a lead in pulling this session together. It's a great partnership that we see great response and great results on. So This is a great one to continue having, and we're excited for the coming a few sessions that we have left out in March.
Thank you very much.
All
All
right.
right,
So
take
thank
care,
you very much.
everyone. Have a good rest of the day, and see you on the next session next week. Goodbye.